You know what? There are so many reasons to be excited and optimistic about our future. So many cracks of light in our world right now. People who are out there courageously blazing new trails and leading the way towards a world where people, planet, and profit collectively thrive. I want you to hear their ideas and let them inspire you to see this time we're in as a fascinating time of transformation. Welcome to the Cracks of Light podcast. I am your host, Laura Storm. Throughout this podcast series, we will co-create a leadership manifesto for a thriving world. Please feel free to join us by going to my website, www.laura-storm.com. And now to episode 3, Dare to Bring Your Magic, with Chinese American professor, business leader, and environmentalist Peggy Liu. Peggy is the daughter of Chinese immigrants and was born and raised in the US. She graduated from MIT, started one of the earliest e-commerce companies in Silicon Valley, and then a venture capital firm in Shanghai. A decade ago, a new calling led her to start a Chinese NGO named JUCCE. JUCCE now works with business leaders and government officials at the heart of greening China. Peggy really is a kick-ass female leader who dares show up in the world to speak her truth. So buckle up for a fascinating conversation on everything from behavior change, the power of storytelling and visualizing, the environmental progress in China, woman empowerment, her own personal transformation, love, ego, the concept of JUCCE, and so much more. I promise you will be inspired, motivated, and excited about the future. Let's start. Peggy, you were a very successful MIT graduate, working first as a management consultant at McKinsey, and then you co-founded your own venture capital firm in Shanghai, and you've done a bunch of other very impressive and successful things in the business world. You've been in many ways the epitome of success, but then your life path took a U-turn over a decade ago, and suddenly you decided to create an NGO with a mission to accelerating the greening of China for a healthier world. Can you tell us what happened?
Well, I think like all the best things in life, nothing good is really truly planned, right? So it's a mix between serendipity and synchronicity. I was in China. I had been here for about 3 years, and I had 2 kids. I had started this venture firm with my husband, one of the earliest hybrids between Silicon Valley funds and China funds. And Susan Hochfeld, who was the first female president of MIT, came to Shanghai on one of her first international trips. And I was an officer of the MIT club at the time. So we hosted her, and she said, look, I'm going to reorganize the entire institute around life sciences and clean energy because I think that that's where we have the most impact on society. So at the time, I was really only wanting to say, how can we as a small club support her mission? And my friend Ira Ehrenpriest in Silicon Valley had started a series of conferences not too long ago at the time on clean energy investments. So I said, hey, I will just bring some friends over from Silicon Valley. I'll bring together some of the VCs here in Shanghai, and I'll call it the first world-class clean tech investors conference in China. And I'll be done with it. You know, that's my contribution. So lo and behold, I was halfway through organizing the MIT Forum on the future of energy in China, and somebody says, who's your Chinese government sponsor? If you want Chinese government officials to speak, you need to have an official Chinese government sponsor. And I looked at them, I was like, I do? I had no idea. And so I went on this mad scramble for what turned out to be the perfect partner, which is NDRC Investment Association Committee. So NDRC is the largest government entity here. But then they said, okay, if you want a high-level government official, the easiest way to invite them is to find a foreign official who is the same sort of peer level, retired or active, it really doesn't matter. And I was like, I looked at them, I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know any government officials anywhere. So I was like, well, gee, what am I supposed to do now? But luckily, a friend of mine called an ambassador, who called an ambassador, who called Steve Papermaster, who worked at the time for George Bush as the U.S. President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. And so lo and behold, totally by accident, I created the first public dialogues between U.S. and Chinese government officials on clean energy. I mean, who knew that in 2007 that this wasn't happening already? And so what they told me was, look, Peggy, we really love this event. It's a great event. And we have 60 MOUs, memorandums of understanding between the two countries. And we literally have nothing tangible to show for it. So there's something wrong in programmatic collaboration. So ideally, we have an NGO that is supported by the government, but not handicapped by being part of the government. So I started joint U.S.-China collaboration on clean energy. And literally the next day, I left venture capital and I threw myself into this. And I dedicated the next 10 years of my life to changing the way China creates and uses energy. And my life has entirely changed.
And what guided you in that decision process? Because you make it sound like an easy decision, but it was basically a complete life change in terms of the professional career you had at the time, and then just making a completely new decision. What guided you?
At my age, which is quite advanced now, with the experience that I have, a lot of the decisions that I make are actually not analytical anymore. They're completely intuitive. Right. And because you have the muscle reflex of making experienced decisions, the really good decisions you make are based on intuition. So one is something was telling me I need to do this. I'm uniquely suited to doing this. There's very few people in the world that can do this. I just need to do it. The other thing is that ever since I was a young child, like you, actually, I was called to use technology. And for me, that was software and robotics, to help improve the living standards of humanity. Like I very, very, very clearly knew that. I was a huge sci-fi fan. I read Isaac Asimov and Frank Herbert and all these, the standard sci-fi novels, except, I was fairly isolated as a Chinese kid from Chinese immigrants and in fairly white neighborhoods. And, I was just an unusual kid. So I had a library of sci-fi books that I just dove into, and I believed that we could make change happen, just like in the books. So in 7th grade, I had this really clear vision that what I should do is build robots at MIT. And part of this was enabled by going to summer camp once and seeing a girl at college at MIT wearing an MIT t-shirt. And I was like, oh, girls can go to MIT too? And that just clicked. And so I just knew that I wanted to go to MIT. And my whole life has basically been, whether it's, working in networking and ISDN software programming at Codex Motorola, or it's going to net manage and helping product manage the first internet software product to allow you to navigate the internet on your Windows computer with a graphical user interface for the first time ever. These types of things, whether it's starting one of the earliest e-commerce startups in Silicon Valley, these are all my attempts to use technology to help move humanity forward. And I would argue that networking during that era in the 90s was clearly the place to be at. In 2007, I would argue that the most important place that I could use my technical skills is to help China go green. And in fact, 2007, when we founded JUCCE, was the very, very, very beginning of the greening of China. So literally, I've been at the heart of the greening of China for a decade, and it's just been an incredible, incredible ride.
Can you tell us a bit more about that? In what way has it been incredible? And if you were to give us some insight into what are the most optimistic signals coming out of China right now?
When I say incredible, when I first started JUCCE, one person, Gary Rochelle, he said, Peggy, your biggest challenge is that you're riding the crest of a tsunami, and your biggest job will be to hang on. And that's what it's been like. So, we're very, very in a very deliberate manner, brought together McKinsey, who very kindly gave us 8 people for a month and a half to help us with a series of roundtables with top experts in the field of China, US, and clean energy to come up with a 10-year strategy of if we're going to try and avoid passing the tipping point of climate change, what is it that we're going to have to do? What are the major changes, not just incremental, but completely transformational? And so luckily in China, because of the scale, the small changes that you make are actually quite transformational. So one of the first things that we did, we were pushed by the US government, in fact, to do this, is to introduce a concept called smart grid into China. And just to give you an idea of what that means, it's a little bit like introducing internet into dial-up, into the old days, the rotary phones. It's that revolutionary for the world of electricity. The way that we did it was very collaborative and solution-oriented. So we brought a white paper that we translated it into Chinese, and we brought it to the people in this space in China who are working on utilities and working on electricity transmission, for example, to your home so you could boil your tea. We showed them these pictures of what smart grid meant, and it included a picture of like electric vehicles as energy storage. And they looked at us and they're like, wow, this seems really sci-fi, and seems like you should be coming back in 10 years to talk about electric vehicles. Well, lo and behold, 2.5 years after we introduced smart grid into China, the leading utility in the world, China State Grid, announced a blueprint to implement smart grid across China by 2020. They invested $7.2 billion into this, which has now exploded into a $100 billion market at least. And this has expanded into smart city pilots, of which China has at least 400 all over the country. At the same time, we launched a curriculum training session, basically, for mayors across China, how to build cities in a sustainable way. So we literally started teaching 50 mayors or above what is an eco-city. And so what we did was we brought the best leaders in the field, whether it's the head of sustainability for New York City, explaining Plan NYC, the deputy mayor of London to explain their climate action plan, Stanley Yip at Arup about how to build green buildings, etc. Right? We are essentially using pictures, videos to imagine a new world at a city level for China. And after teaching about 1,000 mayors how to build cities, I would argue that this program was instrumental, not unique, but it was very core to the rise of eco-city development in China. And China is the only country that is essentially building whole new cities at a time. So we're a city lab of the world. What it means to me, 2 things. One is essentially I get a free master's degree every single day of my life. I have a question and I get to call the top experts in the world. And so I'm basically this sponge of learning, and then I take it and I integrate it into solutions on the ground. And then the second thing is what I've realized in making this scale of change over and over and over again in the last 10 years, I realized that change is super addictive. It's essentially a dopamine hit. It's like drugs, right? So once you do it once, you're like, I got to do it again. And our modus operandi is essentially to focus on change, catalyzing change within 3 years. So it's usually between 2.5 years to 3 years that we hit the sweet spot where other people, other stakeholders jump on board and like magic happens, right? That's transformational at an industry level. So what I would say is, what I've learned is the highest level of achievement of personal happiness, personal fulfillment for me, and what you hear a lot of people say is to be in service of others. And what I've been able to do is fully be in service to others at scale for a decade. And it's super hard to do anything else after you've tasted that.
After you've drunk from the well, it's hard to go back. You talk about building new cities in China, both China and India, and you talk about those cities being human-centered. What does human-centered entail to you?
So our last class that we developed is called Eco-Livable Cities. And the word livable is super important for a country that's managed essentially by scientists and technologists, right? So it was only until this administration that we had some economists into the mix. But, compare that to the US, where most of the government officials are actually lawyers, and maybe comedians and actors thrown in, right? So with that mindset, a lot of the initial development for the first 25 years of urbanization, we're in the midst of a 40-year growth spurt of urbanization. I mean, that's maybe that isn't quite giving it its due. It's the most unprecedented migration of animals in history, right, from rural to urban. So the eco-livable city design is basically recognizing that we have focused on infrastructure so much that we've sort of forgotten and haven't placed emphasis on, how does this impact human livability, everyday life? The China Dream, which is a project that we started in 2010, was heavily focused on how do we get people to move from survivability, safe food, air, and water, our main concerns in China still, to livability, right? And I would argue that cities like Shanghai certainly are a great example of livability just 10 short years after we started. Now, having said that, right now I'm embarking on a new mission to teach people about not just human-centered design, but life force-centered design. So human-to-human energy design.
You need to tell us more about that, because I know that recently in your keynotes and speeches about energy and a sustainable future, etc., you have started to integrate the concept of qi, which means energy in traditional Chinese medicine, into your speeches about these things about sustainability, redesign of cities, innovation, disruption, etc. Why is an old concept from Chinese medicine relevant in this context?
Well, first of all, qi, spelled Qi, is Chinese for air. And it means this energy that exists within your body. It exists within every living object within the earth and within the universe. It is ancient in that Chinese and Indian lineages have basically known about this for thousands of years. But the difference is that in the Western world, basically everything is individual-centered. It's self, it's ego. And so when you talk about human-centered design, really, you're talking about that one individual. How can you make it easier for that person to commute, or that person to buy a product, or that person to do some sort of process in a more efficient manner? It's all individual focused. In the Chinese world, what qi is essentially something that you can not only build up within yourself, but it's something that you can project onto others. Qi is something that I've been introducing to people. It's something that I've been learning for, I have to calculate, but over a couple of decades. And I'm the 20th generation student, or what you call disciple, of something called the South Shaolin Temple Qigong practice. All of this has been taught in secret, transmitted in secret in China. One individual grandmaster to a very small group of students, generation after generation after generation. What's interesting is in the let's say the 16th generation grandmaster lived to he was 126. By the way, and I think people probably lived to were 40 probably on average then. The 17th generation grandmaster lived till 113 years old. It's just like a circulatory system, as your blood circulates through your body. Like you have a bone structure throughout your body. You have muscles, right? So this is simply just another circulatory system that runs through your body. But the difference between qi exercise, and it is exercise, and let's say soccer, or what you would call football in Europe, is that this is the only exercise that actually exercises your internal organs, like your stomach, your heart, your lungs. I would say, although Western medicine hasn't been able to specifically say what qi is, I would argue that it actually regenerates your cells. And that's why our qi masters have been able to live very long. And without giving away my age, please, a lot of people think I'm in my 20s or 30s, and I'm definitely not in my 20s and 30s. And I definitely have a huge amount of energy. People are always calling me Energizer Bunny. And I think it's because partly genetics, but partly because of this chi practice. So the interesting thing, and I'm sorry I'm taking so long to explain it, but it is the first time that people outside of this practice are being exposed to this, because I've only recently, in the last few months, gotten permission from my grandmaster to start talking about this publicly, right? So this is the first generation where a grandmaster has left China to go to the US, where I met him through my father. He left in 1988, and he started taking Western students. It's the first time that females have been students, as far as I know. So it's a very interesting generation, and we're a little afraid. We're a lot afraid. We're a lot afraid that if our grandmaster passes away, that most of the teachings will be lost. And so I felt this calling to start documenting it with some of my chi sister and chi brothers back in San Francisco. And it's really only in the last couple of months that you've seen me talk about this at the World Expo in Kazakhstan, at the Economist Innovation Summit in Hong Kong, and on Facebook a little bit. So what I'm about to tell you is very, very, very few people have ever seen. And certainly if they've seen it, they've seen it in private.
I'm getting goosebumps right now.
Yeah, so basically chi, think of it as energy, think of it as the Force in Star Wars, right? Think of it as Kung Fu Panda, right? If you've seen those movies, this is not actually a huge surprise. But there's two ways that you can use it. You can use it as Kung Fu to fight, right? The Shaolin Temple monks, they had to fight to protect their temple. And there's in fighting, there's offense and there's defense, right? So for offense, what we can do is you can actually sense in your opponent's body without touching them where they're weak. Like you can sense their energy level. And then what you can do is you can target that part of their body. You can also, believe it or not, get to a point where you're building up almost like a battery, building up energy within your body, and you learn to project it like a laser beam, or like what's that sword of King Arthur? What's the name of the sword of King Arthur? You know what I'm talking about? The Excelsius or something like that? Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it's like you're projecting this like a laser beam into somebody else's body. So if you can imagine that, if you accept that, you can actually pull and push somebody from afar without touching them. And that's actually the video of what I showed in Kazakhstan at the World Expo. And you can see it on my Facebook. Then for healing, as I said, you can regenerate your cells. You can massage your internal organs. It's good for longevity. It's good for energy. You're left after practice with this like awakeness, this aliveness. It's not like the caffeine type of energy where you're like awake, but maybe your body's still tired. It's a sense of aliveness. It's if you've ever seen Kirlian photography from Russia, where you see sort of auras around plants or hands and things like that, there's like an aliveness to energy, and that's what it gives you. So you can use this to get rid of colds, to reheal broken bones, to work on early stage cancer, hepatitis B, neuromuscular issues like when you're spazzing. Again, if you learn enough years and you build enough of this energy within you, you can project it. But instead of using it for force, you can use it for healing within somebody's body. Again, you combine it with the ability to scan somebody's body, and then you project it in a path in that person's body, the patient's body, to remove the blockages of chi. So literally, you can heal a lot of these things that I just mentioned without touching somebody. So I know this sounds really shocking. I was in this retreat with 5 women in the magical redwood groves of Occidental above San Francisco. And it was a musical retreat. And these women were all going through transformation, and we're all sisters supporting each other. And I said, you know what? Certain locations on Earth have more energy than others, right? It's usually in nature. I demoed it to a point where they could feel it tangibly, where they're super shocked. They've never felt something like this before. From there, I went to New Zealand to the New Frontier Summit, one of the first workshops that I sat down on, it was about how to raise consciousness in regular, normal dialogue. And at the end, the facilitator, Josh Witten, he said, the best way to do this is just to show your magic more. They called people to do workshops in the afternoons. And I said, you know what, I'm going to try something that just happened a few weeks ago. I'm going to try and demo Qi to you if you're interested. This is the secret practice, but I'm going to try it for you because it's a safe space. And lo and behold, 20 people showed up and everybody felt it in a transformational way, like their eyes woke up. Once you feel this, you realize that your entire reality shifts, right? The way that you design your relationships, one-on-one relationships, the energy flow within meetings, the flow of city design or rooms, for example, feng shui is what we call it, to neighborhoods, to Belt and Road, geopolitics. It all changes because you realize there's this invisible energy flow that you have to design for in a deliberate way because it exists. So lo and behold, these 20 people felt it, and then people started asking me to do it again. So the next day I did another 20 people, and lo and behold, it lifted my confidence, and I realized, wow, I've been taking this totally for granted for decades because I've been busy with life, right? And honestly, I didn't feel like it was mine to give, which it wasn't. I had to get permission. Now I'm like in a very deliberate way trying to see, okay, how can I demo this at scale? So we're looking at people who can help us clinically trial it. The other day I was having dinner with the deputy editor of The Economist and the US business editor, and they're very skeptical, right? Oxford trained engineer, MIT trained engineer. What is this Qi? I don't really believe it, but I'm willing for you to demo it, right? So we demoed it. My dad, luckily, who's also a Qi master, he was there, and we demoed it, and they're like, at the end, they're like, yes, we felt something that we've never felt before. We have no idea how to explain it. At this point, that's where I'm at with this Qi practice. But I do, somebody came up to me after the Economist Innovation Summit, and she's from Guangzhou, and she teaches at an institute. And she goes, you know what? I'd really like to create a whole new curriculum that goes beyond human-centered design to life force-centered design. And I was like, I'm all for that. All for that.
Wow, this is so fascinating. I'm almost lost for words, but I just and what a fascinating journey you are just embarking on, Peggy. I mean, I can't wait to follow you on this. But so you have, because it's been part of your blood lineage, it has been passed down to you. Am I understanding this correctly?
Well, it's not my blood lineage. I mean, it's just something my dad met this guy when he first moved to the US, and he's like, whoa, you really have to see this guy. And I came in to start practicing, and I've been with this guy ever since. But so the interesting thing about the way that lineage is transmitted generation to generation is that you have a small group of disciples, and each one is given one slice of the knowledge, all separate, all different slices, and they're forbidden to talk to each other. And only one person who finds out sort of close to when the master dies, only one person is designated the Grand Master who gets the entire repository of that knowledge. I mean, a lot of times when I tell people this now, I'm like a Qi master. They're like, oh, how come you've never mentioned this before, right? So anyways, it's fascinating. And this is just like one part of my spiritual journey, I think, that I'm on that has really blossomed in the last 2 years. And again, it's a fascinating part of the spiritual journey, but it's just one part of something that is an awakening in me. And I see this around the world, that people are awakening all around the world at the same time, especially in the last year, because something's happening. The entire earth is awakening. And there's a group of people that are suited, whether it's training or they were just born, talented in doing this, but we need to help humanity adapt to changes. Awakening, the good side of awakening is that hopefully things will be better once we awoke, right? But the bad side is it's about disruption. It's about change. It's about, transformative change, which is, not always good. A lot of people don't like change. They like status quo. So I think especially women, we're very well suited to helping humanity manage this disruption. Today's Noah is a woman, right? I am absolutely sure that women have to come together to help humanity adapt.
And I know that you actually told that at the Economist Innovation Summit, that you believe that women are the most suited to lead the transformation to humanity. How was that received?
Believe it or not, really well, because I think I had the right analogy, which is, look, I mean, if you're a mom, you just had a baby, you know, when the baby cries, the mom immediately rushes to it, holds the baby, can't talk to it, but is trying to feel the baby to say, okay, is the baby, did it just poop? Do I need to change the diaper? Is it hungry? Is it gassy? Is it cold? Or, you know, why is it crying, right? And then it needs to, the mom needs to manage the crying baby, all the while preparing dinner for the baby and for you, and then maybe trying to take a shower at the same time. And it's like, I mean, if you have a daughter, you know, and I have two sons, like it is really hard the first year, especially before they can speak, to have this empathy, right? Between, and a lot of this is actually a chi bond, this energy bond between mother and daughter, mother and son, this empathy, right? You know, when I said that, I used that analogy, people immediately got it. And whether or not you've had a child yet, as a woman, you are wired to do that, right? And so, you know, women, I find, having worked for so many years and worked mainly in male-dominated industries until I would say about 7 years ago, where now 90% of our staff is women. I would say that women are innately more collaborative because they want to convene people. They are uniquely suited to finding compromise in a non-egotistical way. But generally speaking, if we put women in positions of government or industry or NGOs where they're helping manage disruption, I think that humanity will be able to weather the change much better. And so they got that. And one of the things that I asked, I had a very specific ask for the economists. I said, look, you cover the innovations themselves a lot. And I can totally understand that because you're Oxford, MIT trained. So I understand where they're coming from, right? The exciting innovations that are coming out faster and faster and faster, of course you want to cover them. But we also need to do, as media, is to responsibly cover the disruption that is the consequence of this innovation, the shadow side of innovation. And then we need to equally cover how can we manage this disruption. So whether it's CRISPR in gene editing, or it's going to Mars, which I don't agree that that's a huge priority, or it's the dying of the coral reefs, or the overfishing of seas so that we won't have any commercially viable fish by 2050. You know, whatever it is, we need to have a bigger dialogue about how humanity is actually going to manage this disruption. How do we take the journey from here to tomorrow, whether it's a better tomorrow or a worse off tomorrow? Both of them can happen if we don't manifest the new reality properly.
I completely agree, as you know. I'm a bit curious to if you can shed some light on whether this transformation, this personal transformation you have been on to kind of have your more spiritual side in your private life, to start talking about this in the external world and integrating this into your business life. Has that been a terrifying process, or has it been easy? Is it difficult for you?
I have to be honest, once you've graduated from MIT, almost nothing is terrifying. So literally everything has been easy after graduating from the fire hose. So it's not about terrifying. It is a great challenge because I find that my greatest role is as a storyteller. And I know that you understand where I'm coming from. So I started from the infrastructure, I started from technology, and I started from catalyzing the use of certain technologies. And what I realized in 2010, really, when we tried to say, hey, we can't just work on the supply side of energy, we need to work on the demand side of energy. In other words, we need to change behavior so that we're using less energy because a third of all energy is lost between generation and use. So I realized in 2010 that we needed to change the way consumers in China, right, 1.3 billion people plus, right, are using energy. And this is something that the West has really been grappling with, all the environmental activists there. But I think we can recognize that we haven't been really successful. So only 10% maybe of the population say that they care about green, but maybe 1% of that 10% actually does something significant about it. So, I really did a lot of research in this China Dream program as to how can we change behavior. And my main conclusion was that we need to change the storytelling. We need to manifest visually the new world. And so China Dream was basically with Ogilvy, with Saatchi and Saatchi S, with Edelman, but then also the geeks in the house, the sustainability folks, the cultural experts for China, using visuals to manifest this new dream, the new China Dream, what it would look like if we move from survivability as a daily issue, daily concern, to livability, livable neighborhoods, to individual thrivability eventually, right? So one is we need to visualize as a storyteller. Two is that I realized that TV shows, episodic TV shows, is the single best way to create new social norms. Whether it's like Will and Grace with the acceptance of gay lifestyle, or Grey's Anatomy with teaching people about AIDS and how it transmits to babies, or what have you, right? So TV is the key. So you have to work with media, and you have to work at the script level. And then the other thing that I realized was to get people to be concerned about sustainability, you cannot talk to people's heads. Behavior change is all about what you love, making people feel loved. A great example is women who go and buy fur coats. They feel guilty because it's not necessarily great for the animals that were killed and slaughtered to make this very expensive mink coat, but they wear it anyway because it makes them feel special, makes them feel loved. So the thing that we've been doing wrong in the sustainability arena is that we've been using a lot of statistics and a lot of Chicken Little, sky falling down, right, drama. That doesn't make people feel loved. So during this China Dream roundtables process, we very deliberately used word clouds, tags, right, to say, what's the words that you would describe the future China Dream? And how does that relate to personal health and wealth, personal prosperity? And then we took the intersection of that and sustainability words, and then we said that is the China Dream. So what we basically said is, to be successful environmental activist, you need to stop talking about sustainability, climate change, eco, green, PM 2.5, ecological civilization. All these words that appear in white papers, we essentially need to eliminate. And we need to use Trojan horses of personal health and wealth. And so this actually led to Tom Friedman eventually writing a seminal piece, China Needs Its Own Dream, about our program. And that, I would argue, catalyzed press that catalyzed Xi Jinping to use that term, his first main speech in 2012, at the end of 2012 in China. And now this is this main national slogan. And you see the word China Dream in billboards everywhere, literally everywhere, on walls everywhere. So out of the China Dream, we realized that actually food, eating, is the real Trojan horse on a daily basis, how you can affect people's actions. Because everybody, well, hopefully everybody eats 2 or 3 times a day. And most people, certainly in China, love eating. So if you can teach people how to eat in a yummy and healthy way, actually that's the best way an individual can affect climate change and other environmental indices. So, for example, food systems is 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Cows are 15% of all greenhouse gas emissions globally. Food agriculture is 70% of our freshwater use. Plastic pollution largely is from all the crap that surrounds our disposable food. So whether it's beer rings or straws or plastic bags, et cetera, it's because of the food system. It's because of the fast food system, the industrialized food system. And I can go on, but food also relates to so many more things, like gender equality, because in poor countries, a lot of the food, the nutrition, first goes to feed the boy in the family, then the girls, right? Mothers and young kids for the first 1,000 days really need nutrition. Otherwise, it creates lots of stunting issues in the future. So, I mean, food is actually, the UN Special Advisor to SDGs actually said this last UN General Assembly twice. I heard him in person. Changing the way we eat is the single intervention that will improve all 17 global goals, sustainable development goals. No other single intervention does that. So we started Food Heroes in 2013 And that's now what we've pivoted the entire organization to, is changing the way people eat in a way that's good for you and good for the planet. And we target young kids through these food hero cartoons because their diets haven't yet formed, their dietary habits, they're open, and then we use games, so they love it. So storytelling, what I was saying is that storytelling has become my life. And what I realized is that I have to be a bridge between the vernacular of different stakeholders to consumers that you want to change behavior. So if I want people who are dealing with innovation in the business world, whether they're financing innovation or they're the innovators, then I need to talk about things like qi and manifesting reality and consciousness through the lens of innovation and managing disruption, right? And visualizing the world where your innovation exists in order to help scale it faster, right? So what I've been honing through a lot of advisors in the movie industry, TV industry, and the visual arts industry is how can we take a concept like sustainability and say it in a way that consumers will change? How do we say words related to consciousness and say it in a way that businesses will change their behavior, or designers like the Life Flows designed, right? And then for regular consumers, it might be, about longevity, about personal wellness, right? It might be about relationships. It might be about sex, great sex, right? When you have good energy together. So yeah, I mean, I'm basically learned a whole master's degree, maybe PhD at this point, about how to be a storyteller.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you and I, we share a lot of ideas, and we both have this fire that we need to help this transformation to this new world. And we both think that there's a lot of new things kind of breaking through, and that's also why I picked the name Cracks of Light. There's so many new exciting things that are breaking through this old paradigm that we're still living in right now.
Yeah, and actually, Laura, I want to say that Cracks of Light is such an appropriate title. I really want to applaud you for that. So if I might get a little esoteric, if you don't mind, for your audience.
Go ahead.
Right now, I will dive a little bit more into sort of spirituality and where I think that the earth is going.
Please do.
Nothing happens out of coincidence, right? So the people like you and I, we're called to this work. We are operating at a certain vibration, right? At a certain energy level. Everything is about frequencies, right? Whether it's the food that you eat, it's alive, it has a certain frequency. People have a certain energy level, right? Music is frequency. So pretty much everything in the world comes down to energy and equals mc squared and frequencies, right? So interesting enough, you can do it the other way. You can two ways. You can heal through energy, through certain frequencies in music, and this is called the Rife frequencies, R-I-F-E. And actually, I created a webpage, which I'll give to you so you can give it to your readers, where depending on your ailment, like tinnitus, or you want clarity, or you have a cold, or some sort of fibroids, you can actually listen to a certain frequency and it will help heal you. That's for positive, right? On the negative side, there's something called a kill frequency. There are people who are using certain frequencies to kill the algae in oceans so that they don't glob on to the bottom of boats, or let's say ocean tidal energy equipment in the ocean. So what will drag boats down, it's actually a third of all energy used for boats, and the Navy spends billions of dollars on this, is that these mussels and oysters or barnacles and algae glob on to the bottom of these boats, right? But you can actually use a certain frequency to repel these live things. So sound is super powerful, right? As my personal energy, my vibration has risen, I have been attracting people to me sort of, I'm going to say magically, but it's like not by accident. It's like magnets, right? It's a purposeful attraction. The people that have been showing up in my life over the last 10 years, as I've been at a certain vibration level to do the work that I need to do at JUCCE to help scale in, these improvements to humanity at China scale, there have been phenomenal people who have been called to work with JUCCE. I mean, like the best of the best of the best experts in the world with the good heart, right, have poured their time and expertise into working with JUCCE pro bono, right? So, but now I find that in the last year, I've stepped up my vibration, and now I'm attracting a small group of people who have both the powers to see this energy, this invisible energy. They're able to actually see it, and they're able to actually channel this into messages, right? And some of them are quite unique, right? I think people in the esoteric world would not be surprised to hear me say some of this is about, like, in the Hindu tradition, it would be like deities. There's will be deities who come to you and talk to you, right, and give you messages and sort of guide you, right? Some people call them like master teachers, or like I think yoga vanis or something like that. Or some people will say they're aliens, right, from other star systems that are guiding humanity. I have seen enough now from my friends that I am a true believer that all of this exists, that they're all different forms of energy that if you're open to it, open to being guided, you can then just hear it. So then the trick is, well, how do you talk back? And what I've learned from some of my friends is that, really you have to change reality, to manifest reality, right? If you're esoteric, you think, you believe this idea of thought creates, right? So thought is structure, right? I don't think I'm saying anything like new. But if you really want to create reality, you need to think about it in visuals and sound. Visuals and like a movie, like a silent movie. Well, not a silent movie, like a wordless, languageless movie with sound. This is very different than sitting there and praying, which I used to do, right? Pray with words. So instead of saying it with words, you have to speak in visuals and images. This is one of the things that I've been learning, and this is, interestingly enough, some of the skills that I've been picking up over the last 10 years, as I just said, right? And now I'm realizing, it's much more than just how do I visualize a world where a particular technology or behavior change exists. It's actually, how do you manifest an entirely new reality? So for me, I see these people come into my lives and teach me these things. And I just posted on my Facebook how I'm so thankful that these people are in my life, because I see that the world is in chaos. My own life is a little bit in chaos, right? My kids just empty nested me to go to the US to boarding school. I'm going through a divorce, so I'm like truly empty nested. So you could say that I'm going through a lot of personal transition, but I feel totally grounded, because I know that there's a purpose, that there's a calling, that not only am I trying to learn these skills about how to communicate in different ways, energetic ways, but that this group of people are all committed to helping humanity, not just use these powers to further their own, ego or sex life or get money, or whatever it is. These special people are all coming together like the X-Men.
Yeah,
right?
I have the same
at
feeling.
A specific time.
Yeah,
at the same time, literally. And then my job is to figure out, okay, how do we bridge them together, right? Because I don't necessarily have these same powers. Like, yes, I have friends who channel aliens and can heal people with alien energy, or I have people who can channel yogic or Hindu deities, and if you drop them into a haunted house, they could blow all these negative spirits away. Or I have friends who can basically break through a veil into the new earth that we're all ascending to, that we're all manifesting together. Yes, I have those friends. I can do none of that. But what I can do is I'm feeling like I'm magnetizing them. I'm finding them because I'm vibrating at a certain level. I'm working at a certain level. So I would say to the people who are more esoteric in nature and who resonate with what I'm saying, and there are a lot of people out there, is that we all need to come together now very, very, very quickly, like now. We need to come together now. And I'm actually working with a variety of platforms like the League of Badass Women of more than 10,000 women around the world, started by Hannah Jones, and the Phoenix Risen project that I'm working on with Stephanie Zhu and Marianne Hoft about a campaign against sexual violence against women. There's many, many platforms where I'm trying to bring people together and help bridge the experts and take those tools and empower these women. So from a very esoteric point of view, like that's the goal that I'm on right now. That's my mission, is to help humanity adapt, but using a much broader set of tools than I ever imagined, like literally ever imagined, right? So So, as a good engineer, what I'm doing is I'm finding the tools, I'm integrating them into a system integration, and I'm, finding the channels to reach my customer. If I were to use a different vernacular.
But it seems like you are so much on the right path also in terms of integrating both the Western, the Eastern part of the world, but also the left and right side of your brain. I mean, it's like you are a bridge builder and easily flowing between different worlds and trying to integrate them in your world. And I truly and strongly believe that is really what the world calls for right now. I have two final questions and then we need to wrap up. One is a very practical one. For those listening and thinking, wow, this sounds fascinating, but it also seems very advanced. How would you advise people to start on a regular basis? Because that's what I want to help spread as well, that you don't need a huge life crisis or to be a selected chi master or anything to start living your life from a different point of view. I'm very focused on how can we spread the awareness about, for example, when our ego is making the decisions and when our decisions are more soul and heart driven. It takes people who are in a more balanced state than the majority is right now. And I think a lot of people relate to that. And when I gave my TED talk a few months ago, many people wrote to me privately, wow, how do you do that on a regular basis? People wanting to know more, and especially people in the Young Global Leaders community that we are both a part of. But what would be your advice to start now?
So one of the things that I realized, and I'm going to make this women-centric, but obviously you could do it with males, is a very simple technique is to invite some girlfriends for tea and go around the room, create a safe space, right? There's indigenous techniques, shamanistic techniques for how do you create a talking circle, right? A safe space. There's a lot of, techniques like, for example, in my last one with Chief Phil, and a hereditary chief who works with indigenous tribes around the world. He brought a white swan feather that was gifted to him. And each person got to hold this white swan feather, and when you held it, it was your time to speak. And you couldn't speak a second time until everybody held it once, and you couldn't speak a third time until everybody held it twice. So there's techniques for creating a safe space. It's called holding space and talking circles. So you have a tea, and you ask a simple question. Ask everybody what their superpower is in service of humanity. And the answer is very different than what is your job title at work, right? You might be a vice president or a CEO, or you might have gotten some sort of awards, right? Or you might be a mother, etc. That's not your superpower, right? Your superpower is something unique that you have a gift that you can use to help humanity become better. You go around and you let the woman think about it and express it. And then the women who know her then reflect back on it and say, well, actually, you're also really good at this, or you do it even better than you're saying in this way. And what happens is something extremely profound. One is that the individual person sometimes doesn't know that they have a superpower, but everybody does. I guarantee you that everybody has a superpower. One of the things that I've been really good at is talking to people and very quickly identifying what one of their superpowers are, even if they don't think they have a superpower. And sometimes you know that you're like talented or smart or whatever, but maybe you didn't say it in the same way. And then two, it's a validation for that woman that other people believe in her superpower. And it's a validation process. And that witnessing of the birth of a superpower is a little bit like us watching the movie of Superman when he first flies for the first time, right? That is super powerful. I mean, I've almost cried, right? Witnessing women who say that they have a superpower, maybe have never been noticed for their superpower before, right? I knew a woman for like a couple decades where she's not really in a great marriage. She may not be the most stylish woman or the richest woman in the crowd. And she's always been sort of overlooked. But then when she said what she thought her superpower was, everybody was like, wow, I want to spend time with you. I want to learn from you. That's amazing, etc. And to me, that rush of her being recognized in itself was amazing. It's transformative. It's so empowering, right? Especially for women who are, appear in a place, but they're not seen for who they are, right? They say something, but they're not heard for what they're really saying, right? So I would say that a very practical thing is to host a superpower tea with your girlfriends and simply be present and be considerate. Let everybody speak. Nobody should really overpower the conversation, right? It's not like you're reflecting back and saying, well, when I did this, or yes, and my, that sounds like me, or blah, blah, blah. It's all about that woman who's speaking at the time, right? That's an
excellent suggestion. Any advice in terms of how we can be better at putting our egos in check, or having our egos in check in terms of it not ruling our decision making? Because what I see from the outside in, after having been in a silent cave for 2 years, is that so much of the things that we see in our world right now, but also in the sustainability field, of how many organizations are fighting each other even though we're trying to achieve the same things. It's very much the ego that are causing that kind of drama and tension. So I have developed my own kind of guiding principles in terms of how I put my own ego in check. And one of them is to not rush out in the world again and start a new organization, but take my time and just develop the ideas that I had in this cave slowly and surely, and just surrender to that unknowing and surrender to uncertainty. But I would like to know, you are out there in the world and living a completely different life than I am right now. How do you make sure to put your ego in check and lead from the heart and from the soul more?
Well, I'm going to give you an esoteric answer, and then I'm going to give you a practical answer. The esoteric answer is, when you're a Buddhist, I was raised both in the Christianity and Buddhism. When you're Buddhist and you believe in reincarnation and karma, and both life and death, exist together, there's only transformation. You die, and that's the point. So if you believe that, and if you feel qi the way that, I can show you that is a tangible thing, even though you can't see it or maybe measure it, you realize that there's a connection from you to your neighbor that you don't know, or the person who's sitting at the table next to you at the restaurant who you don't know. You realize that everybody affects everybody. You have an impact on other people, even if it's not within your circle of friends or your family, right? Your tribe. And so the whole issue with Tragedy of Commons is that we're very Western-centric, and we're self-centered, right? So you just care about what impacts you. But when you realize that everything that you do, the energy you put out, the negative or positive energy you put out, physically affects people that you don't know, you just have a different perspective. And so that's part of like, okay, I'm not just me, I'm part of a greater one. Like, that's very life transforming. So I would say that's my esoteric answer. The more practical answer is, I teach something called 7 Seconds, which is how women can slay their public image. So because I've been in so much press, in different types of press, I've tried to empower women, mainly at the World Economic Forum, Young Global Leaders. I've given them tips on how to succeed in creating a public image and how to manage different types of media. And it's become very popular. I'm going to try and put it online at some point. But one of the key points that I say is, be authentic to yourself in describing who you are, why you do things. The press really are looking for stories of people. So be authentic, because if you're not authentic, they're going to feel it and they're not going to write about you. Okay, so when I am in like a 4-page layout of Vogue or L'Officiel or Harper's Bazaar or whatever, do you have any, it takes me 3 hours to get ready, right? There's an hour of makeup, an hour of hair. I go through 5 outfits. There's a whole team of lighting and camera and stylists and makeup artists who are touching you up between, shoots. And then the way you pose is completely different than the way that you sit in normal life. So you are not natural. You are projecting the image through a vehicle that will best tell your message. But you have to realize, like, if you're in that industry, you realize everything's fake. But the message that I'm giving, the message that you're giving is true. So you have to separate your message, your internal essence, and the way that you're presenting it to have the biggest effect on the audience, right? Because if I looked the way that I do now, sitting on my couch at home in sweats, in my Vogue layouts, you're not going to look at that spread. It's not going to catch your eye. So the key is that you need to turn it on and turn it off really quickly, right? And you need to separate the message and the vehicle from you and your essence, right? Your true calling. And I would say that that is the key.
Thank you so much. The final question is one I ask all my guests on the Cracks of Light podcast. And that's because this is also a process of co-creating a manifest for future leaders. And what 2 things do you believe need to be in such a manifest for leadership of the future? What kind of manifest can we pass on to the next generation of leaders? And what can we start doing already today in order to create this new approach to leadership?
Learn how to be an empath. I would say that the thing that AI and robots can never, ever duplicate is empathy, and it's like an energetic connection. So I would say that all true leaders going forward need to learn empathy, starting with the language of emotions. So the second is really empowering women. So if you're a woman, then empower yourself and other women. If you're a man, empower women, period. I mean, women are the key to manifesting the new reality. We need to give, and it doesn't have to be all women, but women like you and me who are dedicated to this, we need to be gathering the tools now and handing out the tool set to everybody and then working together. So empower women.
Beautiful. I couldn't agree more. Peggy, we need to wrap up, but thank you so much. This has been extremely inspiring, and I know that this will bring a lot of hope and inspiration and optimism to the listeners. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura, and you're doing a great job. You have an amazing transformational story, and Cracks of Light is an amazing project and project title. So I'm so glad that you invited me to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the Cracks of Light podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please help me make the Cracks of Light bigger and brighter in this world by sharing this with your network. Together, we can build a world where people, planet, and profit collectively thrive. And if you have input to the Cracks of Light Leadership Manifesto, please go to my website, www.laura-storm.com. I would love to hear from you. Take care.